Balance makes the world go round. Currently, there is no balance in the aviation security system. The TSA is in charge of protecting airports from terrorism and setting standards. As you can see, there is no balance in this system. This is what the affirmative team's plan will change. There will no longer be a conflict of interest of the government. There will be a balance. That is why the affirmative team stands resolved. The United States federal government should reform its counterterrorism policies for the domestic surveillance of U.S. citizens. Observation 1, definitions. Counterterrorism, Collins English Dictionary, 10th edition. Activities that are intended to prevent terrorist acts or to eradicate terrorist groups. Reform, Merriam-Webster's Online Dictionary, to put or change into an improved form or condition. All the following definitions come from American Heritage Dictionary. Policies, a plan or course of action as of a government, political party, or business intended to influence and determine decisions, actions, and other matters. 4, used to indicate the object, aim, or purpose of an action or activity. Surveillance, close observation on a person, group, especially one under suspicion. Observation 2, goal criterion. Goal 1, our continuing mission is to provide the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. This comes from Mission, Vision, and Values Federal Aviation Administration. From this goal, we can tell that there are really two goals: safety and efficiency. Criterion, the affirmative team should win the round when we prove that our plan will increase the efficiency or effectiveness of the current counterterrorism effort on commercial airlines. Observation 3, plan. A key goal of reform should be to separate airport from screening from the regulatory oversight of aviation security. The way to do that is to move the primary responsibility for passenger and baggage screening from TSA to the nation's commercial airports. The airports would then be free to contract screening to expert security companies, which would compete for the contract. This comes from Privatizing the Transportation Security Administration, Chris Edwards, November 19, 2013. Mandates. Mandate 1. Commercial airports will be required to contract their own security service, which meets ASSAI quality charter standards. Mandate 2. Each commercial airport will receive a sum of money from the FAA monthly based on airport size to be used exclusively for screening purposes. Mandate 3. All commercial airports must have private contractors by January 1st, 2017. Mandate 4. The TSA will be removed from all aviation security. Funding. 70% of the TSA's airport security budget will be used for contracting private screeners. The remaining will be money saved. Agency, Federal Aviation Administration. Enforcement, Department of Justice, and Department of Transportation. The affirmative team reserves the right to expand and clarify on this case as necessary. Observation 4, advantages. Private contractors increase efficiency by saving money. Unique, Privatizing the Transportation Security Administration, the previously stated article. The Cato Institute, November 19, 2013. The TSA has made decisions that appear to have misspent billions of dollars and cause unneeded congestion for minimal security results. Impact, resources wasted. Privatizing the Transportation Security Administration, the previously stated article. TSA seems to have a bias towards spending money on new technologies that have not been adequately vetted. For example, the TSA spent $30 million on 207 puffer machines to detect explosives. But the machines had not been properly tested, had high operating costs, and simply did not work as planned. They were completely withdrawn by 2010 and put into storage. The TSA seems to have lots of other equipment collecting dust in storage. A 2012 inspection of a Dallas TSA facility found 5,700 pieces of security equipment worth $184 million sitting idle. Solvency, private contractors cost less. Flying with fish, cost of private versus government screening in the U.S., USA Today, March 16, 2012. According to the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the cost for passenger screening at San Francisco International Airport, where passenger screening is privatized, is $2.42. Whereas the cost per passenger screening at the comparable Los Angeles International Airport, where the TSA handles passenger screening, is $4.22. Advantage 2, private contractors increase effectiveness by allowing greater security. Unique, no more conflict of interest. Also from privatizing the Transportation Security Administration. Aviation reform expert Robert Poole notes that those responsibilities create a conflict of interest. On the one hand, the TSA is designated as the agency that establishes transportation security policy and regulates those that provide transportation operations and infrastructure. But on the other hand, the TSA itself is the operator of the largest component of airport security, passenger and baggage screening. When it comes to screening, therefore, the TSA has a serious conflict of interest. Arms length regulation is a basic good, government principle. Sub-regulation is inherently problematic. Impact, ineffective. Enhanced freedom, safety, Ditch the TSA by Doug Bando, Free Republic, January 16, 2014. Worse, though, is the TSA's failure to do the job which it was created, secure America's airports and other transportation hubs. Reported Edwards, there were 25,000 security breaches at U.S. airports during TSA's first decade, despite the agency's huge spending and all the inconveniences imposed on passengers. In tests, the agency failed to catch as many as 3/4 of fake explosives. Solvency, safer airports. Airport Security, Time for a New Model by Robert Poole. Removing the TSA's conflict of interest and making the airport responsible for all aspects of security, as in Europe, should also increase accountability for results. Also from privatizing the Transportation Security Administration, most airports in Europe and Canada use private companies for their passenger and baggage screening. That practice creates a more efficient and innovative security structure, and it allows government to focus on gathering intelligence and conducting analysis rather than trying to manage a large workforce. Private contractors conduct airport security more efficiently and effectively, therefore making airports safer. Judges, next time you get on a plane, you should feel safe. This is why it is so imperative to privatize airport security. Thank you, and I now stand open for cross-examination and clarification.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Would you fly on a plane right now?
Would I fly on a plane right now?
Yeah, feeling safe.
I would not feel safe.
Okay. What was your definition of surveillance?
The definition of surveillance was close observation on a person, group, especially one under suspicion.
Thank you.
And this comes from American Heritage Dictionary.
Okay. What was your first mandate?
The first mandate was, would you just like a summary or read word
You
for
can read
word?
it, please.
Commercial airports will be required to contract their own security service, which meets ASSAI quality charter standards.
Okay. Now, what are these standards?
These standards are, it's a standard used by most of the world's airport aviation system. And they go above the government.
It's a global standard, right?
Yes.
Okay. What was your third mandate?
The third mandate is that all airports will have private screeners by January 1st, 2017.
All right. Did you have any funding or enforcement?
Yes.
What was it?
The funding was 70% of the current TSA screening budget.
Okay, now why 70%?
Why 70%? We have evidence. I can read it for you. It was not read in my
Okay,
speech.
that's fine. What was your enforcement?
The enforcement was the Department of Justice and Department of Transportation.
All right, thank you. Is the TSA, okay, no, all right, I gotta ask this first. What was your advantage tags?
The advantage tags. The
Yeah.
first advantage was private contractors increase efficiency by saving money, and private contractors increase effectiveness by allowing greater security.
All right, thank you. Now, under Advantage 2,
Yes.
You mentioned that there were 25,000 breaches in airport security.
Yes.
Could you expound on that? What do these breaches include?
It could include like from going into areas that we're not supposed to be going by the public to just getting items through security.
All right, thank you. Now, under your mandates, I'm sorry, could you just reread the first mandate again?
The first mandate was to privatize all commercial airports will be required to contract their own security service, which meets ASSAI quality charter
Thank
standards.
you. Maybe it was the second. Can you read the second mandate?
The airport will receive a sum of money from the FAA monthly based on airport size to be used exclusively for screening purposes.
All right, is this where the TSA is receiving its funding currently?
From the FAA,
Yeah.
they are receiving their money from the Department of Homeland Security.
All right, so what is the FFA?
The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration.
Okay, now why are they adding money to this?
Why are they adding money to this?
Why are they funding part of this?
Because the TSA won't be in existence and right now, and it will be changed to the FAA as the agency that will be in charge of this.
How much funding from the FFA then?
FAA,
I'm sorry, what was it?
the FAA, the Federal
FAA,
Aviation.
I'm sorry. How much funding is going to be coming from here?
From here,
The FFA.
the 70%.
70%?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Screening. Evaluation of a number of subjects to determine which have the right characteristics or attributes you are looking for. That was from Black's Law Dictionary, 2014. Screening. A systematic examination or assessment done especially to detect an unwanted substance or attribute, from the American Heritage Dictionary, 2013. I don't know what this sounds like to you, but it sounds a lot like to me what the affirmative team is doing with their plan. They're affecting the screening of passengers at airports. And this leads us into the first issue that we as the negative team will be arguing, and that is topicality. The resolution states that we must reform counterterrorism surveillance. And as the affirmative team stated in their case themselves, airports affect screening. What happens when you go to an airport, they call that airport screening, and they're switching this screening to private contractors. This isn't surveillance. They provided you with a definition of surveillance from, I believe, Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, and that definition was the act of carefully watching someone or something, especially in order to prevent or detect a crime. I have three more definitions of surveillance up here. I'm not going to waste time reading them. They all say the same thing, and this is not what the affirmative team is doing. That's the violation. They're not reforming counterterrorism surveillance. The impacts that this violation has on the round is loss of educational value to everyone in this room, because we came prepared. We as the negative team came prepared to argue against a case that had to do with surveillance, and you guys all came expecting to learn more about counterterrorism surveillance, not airport screening. There's a loss of educational value. The second impact is loss of fairness to us as the negative team, because they are kind of coming at us from in a direction that we weren't expecting, because this isn't topical. The voter is a priori, which means that we'll be asking for a topicality ruling at the end of the second negative constructive speech. Jumping right into their goals, their goals were basically safety and efficiency. Now, these are good goals, but they're from the TSA, and they're for the TSA, and as I've already stated, this doesn't have anything to do with the resolution. But considering the fact that it did, we'll go ahead and set their goals and criteria and say that if they can meet their criteria of making airline more efficient and effective, then they would be meeting their goals. However, we will show you in our disadvantages that this is not going to happen. In their plan, there was a lack of clarity in their mandates. We as the negative team still don't quite understand what they're doing. We're still not sure what mandate 1 is. And then the issues with the funding are the biggest issues that we could see. Obviously, the general idea of their plan is switching from the TSA security to private security contractors doing airport screening. And we'll get into this more in the disadvantages. But what I want to hit here under the plan is the funding. They said they're going to be giving airports money to hire private contractors. But the question is, where is this money coming from? How much money is it? How do we know that this money will continue to exist or continue to be enough for potential rising costs in the future? And then the enforcement issue of how do we know that these airports are going to use this funding in the way that is designated to be used and not in some other area? The affirmative team needs to prove to us how exactly their enforcement and funding are actually going to be bringing about their mandates and solving the problems that they present in their unionist points. So let's go right down into the advantages. Their advantages were basically, first of all, that private contractors would be cheaper, and then secondly, of increased efficiency. Now, all right, so basically the argument that private contractors would be cheaper, we're going to be hitting really hard in a disadvantage, which is that private security is actually expensive and not cheaper than how it currently is in the status quo. And So we'll get to that in a minute. Their impact under their uniqueness was that TSA cost billions of dollars, and they read a piece of evidence there, but we have evidence that says that private security is more expensive for a lot of other reasons aside just from like the initial cost. There's a lot more that goes into it, and we'll get into that. Their impact was that resources are wasted under the TSA, but as I said in our disadvantages, the private security firms haven't been proven to be more effective at this. Just because the TSA happens to be wasting resources doesn't mean that private security firms won't as well. So under Advantage 2, which was increased efficiency, they argued that the uniqueness point was there's a conflict of interest in the status quo. There won't be a conflict of interest. Okay, actually, to be completely honest, I don't know if the uniqueness point was that there won't be a conflict of interest or that there is a conflict of interest in the status quo. So they could clarify that, but basically, it works either way for our advantage because if they're switching to private security firms and claiming that there's not going to be a conflict of interest, that'll link into one of our disadvantages, which clearly states that there does. And if they say that so we'll move on. The impact there was that currently it is ineffective, and then the solvency point was safer airports. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention solvency point under Advantage 1, and that was just basically that private contractors cost less, and as I said, we'll be hitting that in disadvantage. And solvency point under Advantage 2 was safer airports, and they read some information from Europe and Canada, but we'll be addressing that in disadvantage as well. All right, so the first disadvantage we have, I'm kind of just going to give you the brief overview of this disadvantages, and my partner's going to be hitting these more in his speech for the sake of time. The first disadvantage is that private security is expensive. The first brink of this is that private security market will cost more money because of the overhead costs of working for the government. The second brink is higher overhead costs for private firms will lead to less competition in the market for airport security contracts. And the third brink is less competition leads to higher prices. The impacts of this are higher taxes because any government-funded program takes taxpayer money. The second impact is lower standards of living and then increased death. Disadvantage 2 is lack of oversight and accountability. The first brink is with a switch to private airport security, the federal government is not solely responsible for airport security. And secondly, with the private sector in the picture, that raises the question of who gets the blame. This leads us to impacts of decrease in airport security, more terrorist attacks, decreased interest in the government can be held hostage to the private sector, and increased civil unrest. We have two more disadvantages, and my partner will bring those up in his speech. As I close, I just want to remind you of the topicality argument. All of this is completely irrelevant because the affirmative team, we shouldn't even continue this debate after the constructives because the affirmative team is not topical under their definition. They're not reforming surveillance. Thank you, and I stand open for cross-examination and clarification.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you restate what you said our definition of surveillance was?
If I remember correctly, it was from the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, and it says the act of carefully watching someone or something, especially in order to prevent or detect a crime.
Okay, now are you aware that our definition did not come from Merriam-Webster's Online Dictionary?
No.
Okay, and you said that are you aware that our goal did not come from the TSA? Okay, and for your plan arguments, you said that there's a lack of clarity in the first mandate. How is that unclear?
To be honest, I don't even know what your first mandate is.
Okay, didn't your partner ask that in cross-examination?
Yeah, and I didn't understand the answer.
Okay, and you said for funding, where's the money coming from? Do you know where the money is currently coming from for the TSA?
Not specifically, because the TSA is not topical under this resolution, so I don't know much about it. I'm guessing that it gets its money from the same place the rest of the government agencies get their money, which would be taxpayer dollars.
Okay, so going back to your topicality press then. So you said that what would you consider walking through a screening machine?
I don't understand the question.
So at airports, you walk through a screening machine. What would you consider that? Would you consider that
Well,
Not watching someone?
I would call it screening because it's called a screening.
Okay, now what was your definition of screening?
Evaluation, well, there was two. Evaluation of a number of subjects to determine which have the right characteristics or attributes you are looking for. And the second one was a systematic examination or assessment done especially to detect an unwanted substance or attribute.
Okay, now did you offer a counter definition?
Uh,
So if we prove that our definition does have to do with TSA, then we'll be topical.
If you can prove that reforming airport
Well,
screening
no, with
is
your
somehow
definition,
topical,
since you offered no definition.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're asking.
Since you offered no definition, if we prove that our definition does have to do with counterterrorism and does make our case topical,
No, because we didn't run a definitional argument or a topicality argument against counterterrorism. It was against the fact that you aren't reforming surveillance.
our surveillance policies, if our surveillance definition goes with the TSA, then will we have one topicality?
No.
Can you explain?
Yeah, because as I define surveillance, your case does not fall
But if
into
we
that
do prove
definition.
that, if we
Yeah,
do,
if you can prove that, yeah.
okay. And what was your second disadvantage?
Just a second. The second disadvantage was, I believe it was, yeah, lack of oversight and accountability.
And did you have any evidence in this past speech?
I didn't read any. My partner will in his
Okay,
speech.
and you accepted our goal and criteria, correct?
Yeah, considering that you're.
So if we prove that, that our plan will make counterterrorism safer, we've won the round.
If you can prove your case is topical, then yes.
In all aspects of our lives, balance is key. This demonstrates the affirmative philosophy for this round. Currently, the government, in regards to aviation security, has a conflict of interest. They are both the administrator and the enforcer. They're making the same rules that they are enforcing themselves, which doesn't make sense in any regulation, any agency, let alone a government entity. This is what our plan is going to fix by providing balance between government regulation and private sector expertise. So without further ado, let's address the negative team's topicality press. First of all, we agree with the negative team's apparent standard, which seems to be the resolution. The United States federal government should reform its counterterrorism policy for the domestic surveillance of U.S. citizens. What we don't agree on, however, is the violation. First of all, the negative team offered no clear counter definition, which means they accepted our definition, which was, just to be clear for this round, close observation of a person or group, especially one under suspicion, from the American Heritage Dictionary. As the negative team accepted this definition, all we have to do to prove that the affirmative team is topical is provide evidence to show that screening, their definition of screening, falls under our definition of surveillance. And in fact, it does. Their definition of screening happens to be examination of an object in order to prove a point, which falls directly with our definition of surveillance, to closely watch something in order to prove whether or not something is worthy of suspicion. For these reasons, the impact the negative team brought up, number one, a loss of education isn't going to occur, and number two, the loss of ground has not occurred as well. For all these reasons, the affirmative team has won that we are topical, and as a result, topicality should be flowed to the affirmative team. Now let's go on to the on-case arguments. First of all, the negative team has accepted our goal. So for the rest of this round, all the affirmative team needs to do to win the round is prove that we are increasing either the efficiency or effectiveness of the current system. The negative team seems to be unclear on our plan, so I will run over the mandates quickly for you. Number one, commercial airports will be required to contract their own security service, which meets ASSAI quality charter standards. Mandate 2, each commercial airport will receive a sum of money from the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, monthly, based on airport size to be used exclusively for screening purposes. Mandate 3, all commercial airports must have private contractors by January 1st, 2017. And Mandate 4, the TSA will be removed from all aviation security. So there is the clarification the negative team seems to need for our plan. With this clarification in mind, it's easy to understand the negative team's objection to our funding, which was, simply put, 70% of the TSA screening budget. To support this, from Privatizing the Transportation Security Administration by Chris Edwards of the Cato Institute, published in 2013, passenger and baggage screening represents about 2/3 of the TSA's budget. Our plan is keeping over 2/3 so we can ensure that the current means are going to be adequate enough to cover the cost of privatized screening. As a result, the negative team's worries about our funding are unfounded, and we have plenty of means to supply the effect we need. Now let's go on to the advantages. Number one was simply that we are going to be increasing the efficiency of the system, upholding the first part of our goal by making sure that there's going to be a decrease in the money, or the money spent, increasing in efficiency. The negative team brought up absolutely no evidence under the first advantage, and as a result, any evidence that the affirmative team still stands. To support the overall idea of both of our advantages, here's a piece from Chris Edwards as cited previously. Aviation security firms have developed a great deal of expertise over the decades. They have responded to the demands of their clients, and they apply the best practices they have learned across the airports they serve. Private businesses make mistakes, but unlike government bureaucracies, they are more likely to improve their performance over time, particularly in a competitive contracting environment. By introducing competition into the sphere of aviation security, we are going to be implementing a basic economic principle, competition, which decreases the price and increases the quality, therefore ensuring advantage one, increasing in efficiency. Now let's go on to advantage number two. First of all, they brought up no direct arguments. The negative team brought up no direct arguments relating to our advantage two, which means that they must accept our evidence under this. To support our advantage two, private contractors are safer. From airport screeners failed to find most fake bombs, TSA says, by Jean Masserve for the CNN in 2007. Investigators successfully smuggled 75% of the fake bombs through checkpoints at airports which use federal screeners. In tests at California's San Francisco International Airport, where a private company conducts inspections, 20% of contraband made it through security. This is a 50% decrease. Using private contractors, we can ensure that the aviation security system will be safer for millions of Americans. In addition to the simple fact that contractors have better detection abilities, our mandate number one is going to ensure that the standards are met. From TSA Ignores More Cost-Effective Screening Model from the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, published in 2011, participation in the ASSAI Quality Charter demonstrates a commitment to meet standards that exceed even what the government requires. These are the standards our plan is implementing. By making sure that contractors meet the goals or the requirements of this quality charter, we are going to ensure that advantage two is met, upholding the second part of our goal and therefore winning the round. Let's address the disadvantages the negative team has brought up. The main issue with their disadvantages are simply this. It's a logical fallacy called a slippery slope. They brought up no evidence to support each of their internal links and impacts. Just what is a slippery slope? From the Introduction to Policy Debate, a textbook written by Christy L. Scheib, the definition of a slippery slope. The slippery slope is a popular fallacy in debate. In this fallacy, the conclusion rests on a certain event setting off a chain reaction that culminates in an undesirable consequence, yet there is no sufficient proof that the chain of reactions will be triggered. In order to avoid this fallacy, be sure to show sufficient evidence to support each step leading to a conclusion. The negative team has brought up absolutely no evidence to support any of their impacts or steps leading to their conclusion, and as a result, their disadvantages cannot be regarded as valid. So in conclusion, the affirmative team's plan is going to introduce a balanced system by introducing competition into the sphere of aviation security. By introducing competition, we will be decreasing the price, thereby increasing the efficiency, upholding the first part of our goal, and increasing the quality, upholding the second part of our goal, and upholding advantage two. Thank you. I now stand open for cross-examination and clarification.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. Okay. When was the TSA created?
After 9/11.
All right. And so did 9/11 happen under private security?
Yes, but it was not the private screener's fault, but rather the standards that were implemented during that time.
Okay. What happens if an airport doesn't want private security and they're happy with the TSA?
Then our plan will make it so that they have private
So airports
contractors.
don't have a choice under this?
No.
Okay. Will airports have to hire more people to then manage and hire the private contractors?
It's possible.
Okay. Back to the topicality argument.
Yes.
Where was your definition of surveillance from?
The American Heritage Dictionary.
Okay. Alrighty. And could you like reiterate how exactly you said that your definition, like what your argument there was with your definition?
Absolutely. You provided a definition for screening, which was essentially examination of an object to ensure or to provide evidence for a fault, which is exactly what surveillance is under our definition.
Okay. If we provided several definitions of surveillance, none of which your plan met, do we have to provide a counter definition? I mean, like, okay, I'm sorry. Did I read a definition of surveillance in my topicality press?
No, you did not.
Okay, alrighty. Was your mandate 3, did it say something about your plan being implemented by 2007?
Yes.
2017?
2017.
Okay, and did you address the enforcement argument?
Not directly.
Okay. Under your advantages, am I correct in understanding that your first advantage is increased efficiency?
Yes.
And your second advantage is private contractors are safer?
Yes.
Okay.
Or they allow for greater
Did
security,
you
but yes.
address your uniqueness points, impacts, or solvency points under either of your advantages?
My partner did in his 1AC, and I backed them up with general evidence.
Okay. Alrighty. You brought a piece of evidence by Chris Edwards. Who is Chris Edwards?
He is an aviation security expert for the Cato Administration, or Cato
Alright.
Institute.
Thank you. Alright. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was once a time when American airports had this private security, this private screening. And then 9/11 happened, the largest terrorist attack ever to happen on the American homeland. Since then, the TSA has taken over and has done an excellent job of protecting America and American lives. However, as great as the TSA is, their plan is not topical. Now, it's dealing with counterterrorism, but it's not dealing with surveillance. Throughout their entire speech, not one thing with speech is, you never heard the word surveillance, and you never saw surveillance. What you saw was screening. My partner did read definitions of surveillance, and I will read those now from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, from the American Heritage Dictionary, and from the American Heritage Dictionary. And they are the act of carefully watching someone or something, especially in order to prevent or detect a crime, and also close observation of a person or group, especially one under suspicion. What we see in their case is that of screening. And this is from Blacklaw's Dictionary. Evaluation of a number of subjects to determine which have the right characteristics or attributes you are looking for. The other definition is from the American Heritage Dictionary. A systematic examination or assessment done especially to detect an unwanted substance or attribute. These TSA officials are looking for attributes, whether that's physical or what they're carrying, whether that's how they're reacting, their attitudes, etc. They are looking for attributes. They are not conducting surveillance. So that is where the violation is. The standard is the resolution. The violation is this issue of surveillance. Even the affirmative team has continually talked about screening. They mentioned it in both of their speeches, and even in cross-examination was asked, when you go through a screening machine, what is that? As my partner said, it's screening. The impacts of this are loss of educational value, as we did not come to debate an untopical case, and also lack of fairness. The voters are a priori, which we're going to be, you'll vote on at the end of this speech. I'm just going to add another voter. It'd be kind of nice to get out of here a little bit early. Moving into their case, we accepted their goals and criteria. We just don't think they're meeting them. We see this already in the status quo. Airports have been kept safe. They're security and they're efficient at what they do. In their mandate, in their first speech, they stated balance is needed in airport security. In their second speech, they told you balance is key in all aspects of life. But what are they doing with their mandates? In Mandate 1, they are requiring all airports to pick a private security firm. In Mandate 3, they are requiring that all airports have this by 2017. And in Mandate 4, they are removing the TSA completely from airport security. I don't see much balance here. All I see is a complete removal and an institution of the affirmative team's plan, which does not contain this balance they seem to want. We have issues with all these disadvantages we're going to be talking about more later. They still did not raise specifically, under Mandate 2, we have the issue of why are they receiving the money, funds from the FAA? I think I got that acronym right this time. Where are they receiving these funds? Why are they receiving it? They said that the TSA is not currently receiving funds from this agency, but now their private contractors, or airports rather, will be on a monthly basis. They'll be able to receive money from this. What is this agency? Why are they giving funds out? Do they give funds out in the status quo? There's a lot of unanswered questions with this. The funding is an issue there, as I just said, and then also the enforcement. Who's going to be held responsible, et cetera, as we're going to raise in the disadvantage later. Advantage 1 was that of it's going to be cheaper. We're going to save some bucks. And they cited they read from Christy Shipe's book, Debate, and they wanted evidence. So here is some evidence. This is from a former TSA's chief who's said privatizing airport security would increase costs significantly and not increase security. From April 25, 2012. Former Transportation Security Administration Chief Kip Hawley said that privatizing screening at airports would do nothing to improve security and would cost taxpayers more money for the same service. We're getting no better result from this. We had this before 9/11, and we're not going to receive anything better in the status quo. And we are going to cost the American people more tax dollars. Under Advantage 2, that of increased efficiency, there's not going to be an increase in efficiency. It's just the evidence I just read. They're going to be getting the same service. I'd like to spend most of my time now, and the rest of my time, into disadvantages. We have 4 of them. We're going to briefly name them all for you. Disadvantage 1, that these private contractors, the private security, they will be increasing the cost. Disadvantage 2, there's going to be a loss of oversight and accountability, a lack of oversight and accountability, Disadvantage 3, that of job loss, and 4, decreased security. Now to get into these, the brink of disadvantage 1, private security is expensive, and so the private security market will cost more money because of the overhead costs of working for the government. This is evidence from Homeland Security Affairs. Winning government contracts come at the same significant overhead cost, reaching and development labor, and negotiation expense comes out of the firm's bottom lines. It makes little sense for firms to invest in Homeland Security if elected officials can abruptly restrict or halt business. The impacts of this are that of higher taxes, lower standards of living, and increased death. The second disadvantage is that of lack of oversight and accountability, the brink being with a switch to private airport security, the federal government is not solely responsible for airport security. So what happens when an attack has taken place? If there is another attack on American soil, who's to blame? We all blame the government. But yet in 9/11, it was the private contractors that did this. No one blamed the private contractor. Who's being accountable for this in the status quo? In Mandate 4, they're revoking that. The impacts of this are decreased in airport security, more terrorist attacks, decreased in trust in the government. The government can be held hostage to the private sector, and increased civil unrest. The third disadvantage is that of job loss. There's evidence here, but I'm running out of time. The brink is there are currently about 50,000 airport TSA agents. all of these agents, as I said in Mandate 4, will be losing their jobs. And the fourth disadvantage is that decreased security, and there are 3 brinks here that hopefully we'll have time to read in the next speech, but right now I stand open for cross-examination.
May you please reread the resolution?
I actually don't have a copy of the resolution up here.
Okay.
It's
Well,
in the-
would you agree that the United States federal government should reform its counterterrorism
Counterterrorism,
policy
yeah.
for the? Okay, thank you. Does our plan involve the United States federal government?
It does.
Okay. How about reform?
It does.
Counterterrorism
Yep.
and
Not surveillance.
well, did you offer a definition for surveillance?
We said that what
So
your case
did
is
you
doing
accept
is
the affirmative
screening.
team definition?
Yes, and we said you're not
Okay.
meeting it through your case.
So what's your definition of screening?
The definition of screening, as we read, 22, screening was evaluation of a number of subjects to determine which have the right characteristics or attributes you are looking for.
Okay,
That's
so
in black
watching
laws.
a subject to determine if it's
Not watching, just a screen of for
okay. So
certain
looking,
attributes.
watching at
Yeah.
it, looking at. Okay, and what was our definition of surveillance?
A systematic examination or assessment found to detect an unwanted substance or attribute.
So could that be summarized as watching something in order to look or find something that could potentially be wrong?
A systematic evaluation, so yeah.
Okay, is that the same thing as screening?
That is screening, that's the definition of screening.
Okay, and how about surveillance? Is that not watching something in order to prove if something is?
No, so it goes much more into detail. Close observation,
Where does your definition account for detail?
I mean, well, right there, close observation. That is what surveillance is.
Oh,
When you're
so-
continually collecting information. When you go to the airport, they're not collecting all kinds of information on you, making sure you're not a threat,
So what?
and they're looking for.
When you go through a screening at TSA, what do the airport screeners do?
They screen you.
How do they screen?
They do multiple things. There's behavior detection officers.
Do they
which
look at people in order to screen them?
They do.
They do. Okay. Do they look at them in order to look for terrorist activity or
They
whatnot?
have a systematic.
Okay, so they're
evaluation.
looking at them in order to look for a object, correct?
Unwanted substance,
Okay.
which is screening.
Okay. So, okay, thank you very much. We'll move on. So, let's see. The negative team accepted the affirmative team's goal, is that correct?
Correct.
So in order to win the round, the affirmative team has to prove either an increase in efficiency or an increase in security?
I would say both.
Okay. But if we can, we should win.
Efficiency. If we can just increase the efficiency,
Thank
but
you.
damage the
Now,
security.
are you aware of what the affirmative team's enforcement is?
I heard the Department of Justice, but that's way too broad with your specific mandates.
Okay. If it were to be the Federal Aviation Administration, would that not be a enforcement agency?
No, because the plan you have, it's an agency, yes, but agencies
and we have
are
put it in an
different from
enforcement role?
enforcement.
Have we put it in an enforcement role?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
At this time, the negative team asked for a rule in the top gallery.
All right, since Top Cali's been given to the affirmative team, we're going to jump right in to the last 3 remaining stock issues in this round. First of all, under inherency, we have the uniqueness points under the advantages, which I would like to point out have been completely dropped by the affirmative team since their first affirmative constructive. Their uniqueness points under the first advantage was one that the TSA costs billions of dollars, and through their plan, they claim to be solving this by switching to private security, which they claim saves money. We've shown you in our disadvantages that it does not, and we'll get there in a minute. Their other uniqueness point under advantage 2, which they failed to clarify after I raised the confusion in my first speech. So I'm still not sure what that was, but basically it flows to the negative team because we raised issues with it in the first negative constructive, and the affirmative team never addressed that since. So those are the issues under inherency. The affirmative team has completely failed to prove the problems that they claim are inherent in the status quo. In order to provide significant advantages, the affirmative team should show us where there are problems and how their plan solves those problems to bring about significant advantages. Because they've completely dropped inherency, therefore they have not shown us there will be significant advantages that come about from the plan. The rest of the remaining arguments will fall under the stock issue of solvency. That's the biggest issue here. We have the four of their mandates, the funding issue, the enforcement issue, and then the disadvantages. First of all, under their mandates, I kind of just want to address these as the general, they're switching to private security. One, requiring private security. Two, giving airport money from we're not really sure where and we're not really sure how long and how much. They haven't answered this question. So big solvency issue there because we don't know if they can actually fund this project. And that links to the funding argument, which is also under solvency. Mandate 3, they're giving airports no choice and a limited amount of time to switch from the current system, which is working, to a private system, which is more complicated, costs more money, that they might not have anybody who's trained or knows anything about that, and now all of a sudden they have to start contracting these private security firms. So again, big solvency issue there. And then their fourth mandate was that all airport screening will be switched from private. The TSA won't have anything to do with airport screening anymore, which links to our disadvantages, which, I want to mention real quick that the issue of enforcement, the affirmative team has been very vague on. Okay, under their disadvantages, the first disadvantage that we have is the private security is an increase in cost. This directly contradicts what the claim that they made under the uniqueness point in their first advantage, which they dropped, that private security is a decrease in cost. Actually, for numerous reasons, private security increased costs. My partner read a piece of evidence in his speech, and I'm going to read another piece of evidence under the Brinks, which I would also like to mention. The only argument against our Brinks that the affirmative team raised was that it was a slippery slope fallacy, claiming because we had no evidence. So I would assume that based on that, if we provide evidence, our Brinks stand. So I'm going to read a piece of evidence under the first Brink, under disadvantage 1. And that's that winning government contracts comes at significant overhead costs. This is from Homeland Security Affairs from 2012. Quote, winning government contracts comes at significant overhead costs. Research and development, labor, and negotiation expenses come out of firms' bottom lines. It makes little sense for firms to invest in Homeland Security if elected officials can abruptly restrict or halt business. And my partner pointed on that too. I have a quote here from the former Transportation Security Administration, Kip Hawley, said that privatizing screening at airports would do nothing to improve security and would cost taxpayers more money for the same service. And this applies to several of the disadvantages. But so there you can see how one of the ways that private security costs more money. The second disadvantage is lack of oversight and accountability. As my partner said, and I have evidence here to read that I'm simply running out of time. But under the first Brink, the switch to private airport security, the federal government's not solely responsible for airport security. So the question becomes, who then is responsible when a disaster happens, like 9/11? Who gets the blame? Who's responsible for cleaning up that mess? And who's responsible for fixing the problems that caused that mess? The third disadvantage is job loss. As my partner said in his speech, there are about 50,000 airport TSA agents that are going to lose their jobs under the affirmative team's plan. And lastly is decreased insecurity. Thank you, and I urge for a negative ballot.
The apparent weapon used by the 9/11 terrorists, box cutters, were not prohibited items at that point in time. It was not the failure of either screening companies or the airlines that employed them that led to the successful takeovers of the cockpits of those planes. Now, this comes from airport screening did not enable the 9/11 attacks by Robert Poole on October 8th, 2012. And what this is saying is that it was not the private contractor's fault. So we will still have high security. We will have even better security by enacting our plan. We will not be reverting to pre-9/11. So going through our case, as we have repeated over and over again, the negative team agreed with our goal and our criteria. Our goal is continuing mission to provide the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. And our criteria is the affirmative team should win the round when we prove that our plan will increase the efficiency or effectiveness of the current counterterrorism effort on commercial airplanes. So when we either show that our plan will increase the efficiency or effectiveness of the counterterrorism policies, then we will have won the round. So the negative team's first argument it will go under the point of solvency and mandates. Now, our mandates, our commercial airports will be required to contract their own security service, which meets ASSAI quality charter standards. And they pointed out that they don't know on mandate 2, they don't know where the money will be coming from and how much. However, we have directly shown where it will be coming from. Let me read the mandate for you. Each commercial airport will receive a sum of money from the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, monthly based on airport size to be used exclusively for screening purposes. We directly spelled this out in our case. So that argument doesn't stand because the affirmative team, the negative team, knows exactly where it will be coming from. Now, they also know exactly, the negative team also knows exactly how much. It will be 70% as spelled out in our funding. 70% of the TSA's airport security budget will be used for contracting private screeners. The remaining will be money saved. Now, you might be wondering, how will they save all this money? However, I'd just like to show this to you. Gatekeepers Under Scrutiny by Susan Sellen. The Transportation Committee based its estimates on cost savings primarily on the higher productivity and lower turnover rates of private screeners, resulting in reduced hiring and training costs. Airports with private contractors have experienced fewer staffing shortages, which require filling with expensive short-term replacements. So this is saying that airports that private contractors cost less. And also, House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, TSA ignores more cost-effective screening model, June 2011. Total cost of screener workforce, private screeners are 42% less costly than TSA screeners. So we can see that the negative team's funding argument does not stand. And now, the negative team also brought up that there's no choice and it will be limited and limited time. Now, I'd like to point out the negative team brought up no evidence for this. They had no evidence supporting this fact. So, therefore, we cannot just go on their word and assume that this will actually happen. And the airports have plenty of time. So going down to mandate 4 of all aviation would be privatized. Yes, all aviation would be privatized. And the FAA, the federal, let me get the exact translation. The Federal Aviation Administration deals exactly with that, with aviation. So this is why all aviation security can be taken from this. Now, my partner did not drop the argument of inherency. She addressed the advantages as one broad point. So therefore, the inherency has not been dropped. And the definition of inherency is that the advantages will come about in the current system without any help, and our advantages will not, and we have shown this continually. So going over to the disadvantages. So the first disadvantages increase in cost, and we have shown that there is no increase in cost. There will actually be a decrease in cost. And lack of oversight. There's the Federal Aviation Administration, who should be over this? It's the Federal Aviation Administration. And going to job loss. Well, jobs will be created also. Private contractors will have to hire more people, so jobs will be created by our plan. So it will just even out. And decrease of security. There will be no decrease of security because, as we have shown, we have the quality charters, and we have and private contractors have been seen to be more cost effective. So for all these reasons, we have won the round.
I'd like to just begin by saying that the affirmative team's goal, they've addressed this several times now, keep emphasizing what seems to be in their criteria a word or. Their goal is that the safest and most secure airport aviation. Their criteria, though, is telling you that it's efficiency or safety. So they're telling you if we win the round when we can prove efficiency or safety, when their goal was that the safest, most secure, not the most efficient. So even if there was issues with their funding, or they could be most efficient, that does not mean they're increasing security, and they have not done so. So I just let them point out that with their criteria, they need to meet both. I mean, they have to prove that they're being more efficient and increasing the safety. It's not an either or, because these are lives we're talking about. I'd like to point out that they pretty much dropped inherency and significance, but I'm going to go back over this. Under inherency, the uniqueness points under advantage 1 was that it costs billions of dollars for TSA. They're still going to cost billions of dollars under the affirmative team's plan. It's just not going to cost quite as much. So they're not solving for this issue. There is no issue here that we're solving for. Advantage two, the uniqueness point here was that they're more efficient. And again, they have completely not addressed the arguments we have raised. Under significance, their advantages, they did not show the inherency, and that they did not provide significant advantages from their from their plan. These have not been, okay, we're going to save this many more lives, we're going to prevent these breaches. They said there's, 25,000 breaches? Whether that's people going places they shouldn't or not, they did not say that their plan will prevent this. They did not show by how much it would prevent this. They did not say, hey, you know what, if we institute this plan, then 1,000 breaches would be the maximum we would see. They never showed any of this. There are no significant advantages being brought about by the affirmative team's plan. In fact, there are issues there are disadvantages here. They're not going to be bringing about advantages. They're going to be bringing about the opposite. The passing of their plan won't help. It will hinder the status quo. Under solvency, we have there are several issues. Everything from their plan, how things are being conducted, to their funding. Again, because they stated that the TSA does not receive funding from the FAA, but now they are going to be receiving funding for these programs on a monthly basis, etc. The points I would really like to hit on now are their disadvantages, because these are our most important thing. Because when we pass the affirmative team's plan, all we're going to see are bad things. The first disadvantage is that of an increased cost. My partner and I have both read evidence explaining that this is not what the affirmative team has been claiming, that there's going to be a decrease in costs. There's going to be an increase. We both read evidence stating this. Disadvantage two is that of lack of accountability and oversight. They did not say who would be held responsible. We've asked the question now, and we have not heard an answer. Who's going to be held responsible if another 9/11 attack happens? Who's going to be held accountable for these things? They're kicking the boot. They're just giving the boot to the TSA and saying, "Hey, you're out of here." And they're putting standards on them that are global standards. Who's enforcing those global standards? So many enforcement issues here. Who's going to be accountable, and why? Disadvantage three is that of job loss. And they try to say, "Oh, we're not going to be eliminating jobs. These people have their jobs. In fact, we're going to be creating jobs." And if they're really going to be creating jobs, then I would think that it would also increase the cost. So either way, this works as a disadvantage. But I'm going to read a quick piece of evidence here under the disadvantages. And that is from our workforce, the TSA.gov. Most TSA's workforce are transportation security officers. About 50,000 transportation security officers screen 1.8 million passengers every day at more than 450 airports across the country. All these people screening. If there's not going to be a job loss, then where's all this funding coming from that they claim? Disadvantage four is probably one of the most important. That's of decreased security. And as we have read evidence stating, they're not going to be increasing the security. We're not going to see any change. What we're going to have is decreased security, as we saw with 9/11. And so it comes down to this. We have to weigh the advantages and the disadvantages. Thank you.
Competition is a friend of consumers, which includes everyone, from Clarence B. Carson and Paul A. Cleveland. This point reinforces the affirmative team's stance for this round. By implementing competition into the realm of aviation security, we are going to introduce balance into the aviation realm by making a way for government to enforce through the FAA, providing the safety regulations, and for the private sector to do what it does best, provide a good quality product. For this speech, I'll be going through the affirmative team's plan format, as all speakers have done throughout this round, and addressing the stock issues along the way. First, therefore, we fall under the goal, under which we have the stock issue of solvency. All the arguments really come down to this one thing. As long as the affirmative team can prove we are increasing the efficiency, or either decreasing the cost or increasing the security of our nation, we should win the round. And we'll see how this is so in the advantages. That brings us down to the plan under which we have solvency. The only remaining solvency issue the negative team has brought up is that of funding, which we've already clarified in further speeches. Just to reinforce the fact that we are going to have enough funding, simply because contractors cost less, from Chris Edwards of the Cato Institute in Privatizing the Transportation Security Administration, written in 2013, the SFO screening operations, an airport that uses federal screeners, or private screeners, also had lower employee attrition rates than LAX, one that used federal screeners, leading to reduced costs from recruitment and training. Federal rules require that private screeners be trained to the same standards as federal screeners, but even with that restriction, the airport with the private screeners was able to achieve those standards at a lower training cost than TSA screeners. This will tie into our advantage one, but for now, just realize the negative team has brought up absolutely no evidence regarding the funding, why we shouldn't have enough funding, and the affirmative team has in previous speeches. For this reason, we have won the enforcement point and therefore have won solvency. In addition, I will be addressing disadvantage 2, which deals with the enforcement under our plan as well, simply because our plan has required that the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, be in charge of enforcing. So the negative team's worries that we are not going to provide enough oversight are unfounded. The Federal Aviation Administration will be in charge of overseeing, as we've emphasized over and over throughout this round. So that brings us down to the advantages. Again, to summarize both of the advantages, and then we'll hit the points dealing with solvency, inherency, significance along the way. From Basic Economics, 3rd edition, by Clarence B. Carson and Paul A. Cleveland, published in 2010, competition is the most effective device for keeping prices in the vicinity of the cost, since the profits of one company tend to spur greater innovative efforts of the others. As a result, product quality relative to price improves over time as people are left free to trade on terms they find mutually agreeable. By introducing competition into the realm of aviation security, we are going to be increasing the quality as well as decreasing the price. Therefore, we've already upheld the first part of our goal, which has to do with efficiency. This falls under advantage 1, as well as disadvantage 1, since they deal with the exact same thing. All the evidence in this round regarding the efficiency has been provided by the affirmative team, supporting our point, and therefore, for this reason, we have won the advantage 1, upholding the first part of our goal. Half of solvency, half of the round is already won by the affirmative team. This brings us down to advantage 2, which is with the increase in security. We've already read evidence saying that private contractors catch more bombs than the federal screeners, so there's already evidence to prove that the contractors are safer. By implementing them into the status quo, our plan is going to provide that advantage and therefore uphold the second part of our goal, which is that of increased security. For these reasons, we've already won the entire round by upholding our goal, as the negative team themselves admitted in cross-examination. The only issues left to address for this round are the 2 disadvantages the negative team has brought up regarding job loss and regarding job loss. The other ones have been addressed in the speech. As my partner already brought up, the companies, private contracting companies, are going to see a surge of business after our plan is implemented, simply for the fact that all airports are going to need airport contractors. And as a result, there is going to be a demand for screening employees. And so our plan, rather than resulting in a decrease in job loss, is actually going to provide opportunity for more jobs. And as a result, there's no disadvantage. In fact, this is an added advantage. So in conclusion, our plan has provided the issue of solvency. We've upheld our goal, and for this reason, we have already won the round. Significance, we are going to introduce a significant change, a significant benefit into aviation security. Inherency and topicality have already been addressed. Thank you, and for this reason, I strongly urge for an affirmative ballot.